Jeffrey Epstein accuser Virginia Giuffre appeared Tuesday outside a federal courtroom in Manhattan to reiterate her allegations that the financier who killed himself earlier this month ordered her to have sex with Britain's Prince Andrew. She called on him to come clean about it. Her remarks came after an extraordinary court hearing was called by the judge in the Epstein case as a way to give voice to alleged victims after the financier's death. Last week, Buckingham Palace released a statement denying the allegations against Andrew after a London tabloid released a video purporting to show him in 2010 at Epstein's Upper East Side townhouse waving goodbye to an unidentified woman. Giuffre, whose maiden name is Roberts, was one of nearly 24 Epstein accusers who spoke out in the New York courtroom. She says that at age 15, while she was working at Mar-a-Lago, the club owned by future President Donald Trump, she was procured for sex by Ghislaine Maxwell on behalf of Epstein. She said, "I was recruited at a very young age from Mar-a-Lago and entrapped in a world that I didn't understand, and I've been fighting that very world to this day, and I won't stop fighting. I will never be silenced until these people are brought to justice." Giuffre, who is now married and living in Australia, said that on Tuesday. Among the celebrities she said she had sex with is Harvard Law School professor emeritus Alan Dershowitz. Last week, Dershowitz denied knowing Roberts at a conference held by the Conservative Steamboat Institute. He claimed he was the victim.
I am a victim of the Me Too movement.
Well,
sure.
Virginia Roberts has named many powerful men as people that she says she was directed to have sex with by Jeffrey Epstein. What do you say to this?
Well, I never met the woman. I never heard of her. I never met her. And we got some emails recently that were sealed. They tried to seal it. They first tried to deep six it. We subpoenaed the emails. The lawyers for her said they didn't have any, but we finally got them. And in the emails, she admits that in 2011, which is 9 years after she claimed she had sex with me 7 different times, in places I never was at, islands, ranches, airplanes, in front of my own house, she said I had sex with her. And then she came into my house. At the time, I had a young daughter. We had video surveillance. In any event, she said she had sex with me in 2002. Then in 2011, she writes an email proving she never heard of me. She has to be told, "Oh, Dershowitz, he's the guy who represented Klaus von Bülow. He's famous. You should put him in your book." This is all in emails. "You should put him in your book because he will help you sell the book." So then she puts me in the book as someone she did not have sex with. She said she had sex with Professor Steve. She said she had sex with Leslie Wexner. She said she had sex with George Mitchell. She said she had sex with Bill Richardson. She said she had sex with you name it. But she said she did not have sex with me. She once met me with Jeffrey Epstein. Then, when she meets her lawyers a few years later, suddenly she remembers. She gets woke. She remembers, "Oh, yeah, that guy I never heard of, I had sex with him 7 times. And how anybody could believe this is remarkable to me. So I hired the former head of the FBI, Louis Freeh, who was a former federal judge, and I said, "Here, you do this. I'm not going to even talk to you. I'm not going to be involved with you. Here are all my travel records. You do an investigation." He did an investigation. He said there was absolutely no truth to the charges. We live in a post-truth world where identity politics prevails over everything else, and I'm going to fight that in my own case. I'm going to fight it in anybody else's case. The Me Too movement is great. It's wonderful. They have made people responsible for acts they've done in the past. By the way, in every Me Too case, the accuser and the accused knew each other. There was a relationship. Was it a consensual? Was it non-consensual? There was always a relationship. Mine is the only case where there is no evidence, because it didn't happen, that I ever met this woman or saw her or she ever saw me. So it's a remarkable case because it's totally black and white.
Why do you think that she's accusing you versus some of, the President Trump or Bill Clinton, some of these others that she no longer says did any wrongdoing?
She told her best friend that, and we have it on tape. She told her best friend that she accused me because her lawyers pressured her into it, because here was the plot. There's a very wealthy man. He owns Victoria's Secret. His name is Leslie Wexner. Lives in Columbus, near Columbus, Ohio. So the plan was a very simple plan. Name Dershowitz in public, then go, lawyers, privately, secretly to Wexner and say to Wexner, "You saw what happened to Dershowitz? You want that to happen to you? There are ways of resolving this." And that's what happened. We have the chronology, we have the dates, we have the time. We know that her lawyer went to speak to Wexner's lawyer. Wexner's lawyer used the word shakedown when he spoke to me about it. Wexner's wife used the word shakedown. So I was the perfect stalking horse for an extortion plot.
Harvard Law School professor emeritus Alan Dershowitz. Leslie Wexner is the founder of Victoria's Secrets and a close friend of Jeffrey Epstein. Feminist attorney Gloria Allred says she's not representing Roberts and has no direct knowledge of the charges against Dershowitz or the other celebrities alleged to have sex with underage women procured by Epstein and his associates. But she says if Roberts is lying, she could be sued. So far, no libel suits have been filed.
Accusing someone of extortion is accusing them of a crime if the individual who's made allegations feels that she or he has been defamed by those allegations, accusing that person of a crime, then they would have recourse in a civil lawsuit against Mr. Dershowitz. We'll have to see what happens here, but obviously Mr. Dershowitz is defending himself, and he has every right to do that, as anybody does. And we'll see what happens.
What kind of Svengali guy was this Epstein, from what you can gather from what people have said, that he was able to get so many people to do his bidding in a way they look back on and thought they were really the victims of abuse?
For many of them, it wasn't just that they thought they were victims of abuse. They were, in fact, child victims. The allegation by the prosecutor in the charge filed against Mr. Epstein, or the charges, was that they were victims of sex trafficking of underage minors. This was very, very serious. In the original indictment or charges against Mr. Epstein, it was also charged that unnamed individuals conspired with him because he could not have done it alone, that there were others perhaps who were recruiting victims who may have been assisting in conspiring to get those victims to Mr. Epstein so that they would then be sexually victimized by him. And so that's an investigation, by the way, that continues. It did not end with the death of Mr. Epstein, and we're looking forward to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York continuing that investigation, and he assured me personally that he would continue it. And we'll see where the facts lead and if it results in the indictment of anyone else, because this story does not end with the death of Mr. Epstein.
What do these people do with their spare time, and what is it that links them all together?
He basically groomed them to think that he really cared about them, that he might help them in some cases. In fact, in some cases he did help them. But then ultimately he victimized them in a sexual way that would be against the law. I call that child sexual abuse. I don't even call it pedophilia, because pedophilia essentially means lovers of children, and I think those who sexually abuse children do not love children. They are simply using them as sexual objects. And by the way, a child, a minor, anyone under the age of 18, it's a matter of law, Paul, cannot legally consent to be sexually abused because they're too young and the law wouldn't recognize it even if they said okay. So, yes, it's clear to me that crimes were committed by Mr. Epstein, and now the question is, who else is going to be held accountable?
Who is involved in all this? Who are all these famous people whose names have been brought up? I mean, I know you only deal with some of the people, but, if some were right, that tells me that the others might be right, too. I mean, a lot of famous people were dragged into this, including the President of the United States.
Paul, I mean, there has to be a serious investigation. We're not saying guilt by association, but we are saying, look, those in his inner circle, those whom certain victims are accusing, whether they're well-known, whether they're celebrities or whether they're not, there has to be an investigation to see if anyone knowingly conspired with Mr. Epstein to sexually victimize these children. And I think we're going to get to the heart of it, but the investigation has to continue.
The whole circumstances of I know they're saying it's suicide. The medical examiner, I'm sure, is a very smart person and knows what they're doing, yet that has not put this to bed in people's minds. It's on the tip of everybody's...
You're absolutely right. And the system failed the victims. The system failed the court. The system failed Mr. Epstein because he was not being supervised the way he was supposed to be every 30 minutes someone checking. You're correct. There's a lot of suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of Mr. Epstein. I'm not ready to say it was a suicide or not. The medical examiner for the city of New York said the cause of death was suicide. But there's so many strange occurrences here that apparently he was not checked on every 30 minutes as he was supposed to be checked. He did not have a cellmate, which was also something that should have been in place. One of the cameras apparently in that area was not functioning. Allegedly, there were 3 fractures in his neck, which also would be consistent with suicide, but could also be consistent with strangulation. And so there are more questions than answers in this. And that's why yesterday I argued to the court that I think it would be important for the court, which is a neutral party, to oversee an investigation as to what happened. Of course, the question is, does the court have jurisdiction or the power to oversee such an investigation? That's to be determined. But in any event, right now there are investigations as to his death.
Where does this go? What's the next step?
The next step is a continuing investigation, and we don't know what the result will be. I'm not sure the investigators know. The story is not over. It's not the end because he died. In many ways, it's just the beginning.
Feminist attorney Gloria Allred.